Somewhere in the mountains of Southeast Asia, there may be an animal that most people have never seen. An animal so elusive that scientists have spent decades trying to find it. An animal that wasn't even known to modern science until 1992. It has long, almost perfectly parallel horns, white markings across its face, a dark, mysterious body, and a name that sounds almost mythical. The Saola, sometimes called the Asian unicorn. But here's the strange part. The Saola isn't a legend. It is real. The question is it still out there? Because the last conclusive detection dates back to 2013. And since then, the forest has been almost completely silent. The story of the Saola begins in 1992. In the forests of central Vietnam near the border with Laos, a team of scientists and conservationists was surveying wildlife. They weren't looking for a unicorn. They weren't expecting to discover a new large mammal. And they certainly weren't expecting to make one of the most remarkable zoological discoveries of the 20th century. But then, they found something strange. In a local hunter's home were unusual horns. Long, straight, almost perfectly parallel. Scientists began investigating, and eventually the horns were connected to an animal that modern science had never formally described. A completely new species, the Saola. Think about that for a moment. A large land mammal had been living in the forests of Southeast Asia while the rest of the scientific world didn't even know it existed. By the time the discovery was announced, the Saola had already been living there for thousands, perhaps millions of years. We simply hadn't noticed. And when you finally see one, it's easy to understand why people started calling it a unicorn. The Saola is a medium-sized hoofed mammal with a dark brown body and striking white markings around its face. But its most unforgettable feature is its horns. Long, narrow, and almost parallel, they rise from the animal's head like two polished blades. And unlike many animals in which horns are primarily associated with males, both male and female Saola have them. The animal may look mythical, but biologically, the Saola is very real. But its most unforgettable feature is its horns. Long, narrow, and almost parallel, they rise from the animal's head like two polished blades. And unlike many animals in which horns are primarily associated with males, both male and female Saola have them. The animal may look mythical, but biologically, the Saola is very real. It belongs to the cattle family, and yet it is so unusual that it has its own genus, Pseudorix. There is only one living species in that genus. One species. One extraordinary animal, one tiny branch of Earth's evolutionary history that exists nowhere else on the planet. And then comes the strangest part of the story. We know surprisingly little about the Saola. What does it eat? How far does it travel? Where does it give birth? How does it communicate? How does it interact with other Saola? And perhaps most importantly, how many are left? Scientists still don't have simple answers to many of these questions, and the reason is frustratingly simple. The animal is almost never seen. Much of what we know has come from local knowledge, a small number of photographs, physical evidence, and a handful of animals that were captured and studied briefly. There is no large population of Saola living comfortably in captivity. There isn't an established captive breeding colony waiting to save the species. There isn't even a reliable population census. In other words, we're trying to understand an animal while barely being able to find one. To understand why the Saola is so difficult to find, you have to understand its home.
The Annamite Mountains stretch along the border between Laos and Vietnam. They are rugged, wet, steep, and dense with forest. In some places, visibility can collapse to only a few meters. A person can walk through this landscape and hear dozens of animals without seeing a single one. Now imagine searching for an animal that naturally avoids human contact, an animal that may live across scattered pockets of forest, an animal whose population is already extremely small. You're not looking for a herd. You're not looking for hundreds of tracks. You're looking for a clue, one footprint, one dropping, one photograph, one hair, anything that says, "I'm still here." But the greatest danger to the Saola isn't something mythical. It's something painfully ordinary, a wire loop, a snare. Across parts of the Annamite forests, hunters have used snares to capture wildlife, and these traps don't understand what they're catching: a deer, a wild pig, a civet, or a Saola. The trap doesn't care. That's what makes snares so devastating. A rare animal doesn't need to be specifically targeted to disappear. It only needs to walk through the wrong part of the forest. Conservation teams have removed enormous numbers of snares from protected areas in the Saola's range, but every forest path cleared of one trap can hide another. And for an animal already living on the edge, every trap matters. Then, in 2013, something extraordinary happened. A camera trap captured a Saola. Not a drawing, not a horn, not a footprint.
A living animal. For a moment, the mystery had a face again. The camera had captured what human eyes almost never could. A Saola was still moving through the forest. Still alive. Still hidden. Still there. But then, the cameras went quiet. Year after year. Search after search. No conclusive detection. The last clear evidence remained behind in a photograph. But nobody simply gave up, because when an animal disappears from the cameras, that doesn't automatically mean it has disappeared from the forest. It means you need better ways to look. Today, conservationists are approaching the Saola almost like a biological detective case. Camera traps are placed in likely habitat. Field teams search for tracks and other signs. Dogs can be trained to detect biological traces. And scientists are developing ways to test samples in the field. Recent conservation efforts in Laos have included rapid DNA testing of biological material in the search for evidence of Saola. Think about what that means. They may not need to see the animal. They may only need to find something it left behind. A tiny biological message buried somewhere in the forest. A message that says, "I was here." And now we arrive at the question that has haunted Saola conservation for years. How many are left? Nobody can give us a precise answer, and that's part of what makes the story so frightening. We know the species exists. We know its habitat. We know its biology. But we don't know exactly where surviving animals are. We don't know how many remain. And we don't know how much genetic diversity is left in the wild. Conservation experts have warned that the remaining population could be extremely small, possibly fewer than 100 individuals. But even that number is uncertain. Imagine a species existing on Earth with fewer individuals than a small village. And imagine trying to find them inside thousands of square kilometers of mountain forest. You might wonder, why does one animal matter so much? Why should the world care about a creature most people will never see? Because the Saola represents something bigger than itself. It reminds us that Earth still contains mysteries hiding in plain sight. In 1992,
scientists discovered a large mammal that modern science didn't even know existed. That discovery happened in our own time. Not thousands of years ago, not in some forgotten fossil bed. 1992. That means there could still be more secrets hidden in those forests. More species, more behaviors, more evolutionary stories waiting to be discovered. But discovery only matters if the species survives long enough for us to learn its story. And that is where the Saola becomes more than an unusual animal. It becomes a race against time. Because we may have discovered this animal just as its existence was beginning to disappear. Somewhere in these mountains, perhaps, a Saola is still walking, quietly, invisibly, following the same ancient paths its kind may have used long before humans knew its name. Maybe tonight, somewhere beyond these trees, one will pass a camera trap. Maybe it will leave behind a footprint. Maybe a trained dog will find a trace. Maybe a tiny biological sample will contain DNA. Or maybe the forest will remain silent. We don't know. And perhaps that's what makes the Saola so extraordinary. We discovered it only yesterday by the scale of Earth's history. And now we're racing against time to make sure we don't lose it tomorrow. Because sometimes the rarest animal isn't the one that nobody has discovered yet. It's the one we discovered and may already be running out of time to save. This is the Saola, Asia's hidden unicorn. And somewhere in the forest, it may still be walking through the darkness, completely unaware that the world is searching for it. Welcome to Hidden Minds. The world is stranger than we think.